Hey, praise team. In our culture, we see if someone is being used, quote unquote, being used, we see that as a bad thing. I was reminded this week that Jesus was used. Now, hear me out here. Let me finish. Jesus chose obedience. He chose to be used. And though he had every right to demand allegiance from his creation, he submitted himself to creation's needs. And in so doing, he submitted himself to the Father's will. In Mark chapter 1, verse 12, we see that after he's baptized, the text says that he was sent out into the desert, that the Holy Spirit sent him out into the wilderness for 40 days. And technically the word there is he was shoved. The Holy Spirit shoved him out into the wilderness, into that hardship. But that's only because he was actually willing to get shoved. He was willing to be used. He chose to be used. He'd shown that for 30 years. Day in and day out, he chose the Father's will. But his first steps into public ministry would be taken in obscurity, in testing, and in daily obedience. In every way, his trust was in God. So I want to encourage this team, in this thought this week, to follow in the steps of Jesus and choose to be used. While Jesus was tempted in the desert, his final answer to his enemy was this: you shall worship the Lord your God, and him only shall you serve. His allegiance was only to God, and that should be the same for us as well. Getting used is a great honor when you're being used for God's glory. And I'm grateful that everybody that I know of on this team, even though yes, pride exists, that as far as I can tell, that this team wants to be used for the glory of God. I think the question that we might need to ask ourselves is this: how can we make sure that we're truly serving for God's glory and not our own? I think the answer to that question is oftentimes revealed in the way that we feel when we feel like our ministry is going unnoticed or unappreciated. And I'm sure you know what that's like. I'm sure you've had those feelings before. I mean, have you ever poured your heart and your time and your energy into preparing to lead worship, and then you do it and no one seems to say anything or even notice? I know we've all wrestled with those feelings. I know I certainly have. One of the things that I say to our tech team a lot is, if no one says anything to you on a Sunday morning, that means good job. And I think this is true for many of us who serve in pointing people to the glory of God. The reason that we do what we do, the reason that we choose to be used, is for God's glory, and of course not our own. But maybe I need to add something to that little axiom. Maybe I need to say this: if no one says anything to you on a Sunday morning, that means listen for God's voice. Because God actually commends that kind of service. As we serve on the praise team, we need to remind ourselves of what Jesus taught us a few times throughout Matthew chapter 6, where he tells us that the Father who sees what is done in secret will reward you. God gives a reward for that ministry that's done in the secret place. And he commends it. He honors it. And so I just want you to know that if you're feeling unnoticed or unappreciated, just let this serve as a reminder that God sees. He notices. And I pray that you draw strength to continue to serve, continue to be poured out, choose to be used. And don't forget that I am also grateful for every single one of you. Just a thought for this week.